Hi, everyone. I'm Kate Wardin, and I'm an engineering manager at Target Corporate in Minneapolis, Minnesota. I'm so excited to be here speaking at DevOps Pro Europe alongside so many admirable speakers. And before I start, I just want to thank you so much to the organizers for putting on such a wonderful event. It's been such a difficult year for many, and these opportunities to connect with and learn from fellow technologists are just wonderful. So thank you so much for having me. And I'm here to talk about an engineering team where everyone is a leader. And I'm going to start by telling a story. About 5 years ago, it was an early Wednesday morning, and I was standing in line to buy my team celebratory donuts. Now, similar to a lot of teams, this was a standard tradition that we used when we had just completed an especially challenging project. In this case, we had just wrapped up a pretty strenuous week of implementing a major upgrade to our Elastic logging cluster. And we agreed as a team that we were going to spend the first hour of that day offline discussing non-work topics and celebrating this win. So as I mentioned, I work for Target. We're a retailer and we have those silly consumer holidays like Black Friday that are, of course, a very stressful time. We want to make sure they go really, really, really well for our guests. And thankfully, this was, a successful and much anticipated upgrade that resulted, though, in a lot of hours of, overtime, late night calls, and cross-team performance tests. And so I was personally exhausted as I was reflecting on the past couple weeks. And I was thinking about, how this experience would normally leave me feeling really drained and ready for time off. But for some reason, this team and this project was just different. And instead, I was feeling super motivated, excited to really just start taking on more work with this group of people. And to this day, it is still one of my favorite memories and actually one of the best teams that I have worked with. And I started to think about, what made this team's culture so special. As you might know about me, a lot of my work and passion really emphasizes the importance of effective engineering managers and why they are so essential for software engineering teams. And so I'm embarrassed to say that this team actually had one unique characteristic. We were in between leadership for several months, and so we actually had no manager. But our culture was just so strong, and so it allowed us to really bear the toughest and most strenuous projects that most of us had worked on. And I realized that it wasn't just up to a manager to create and sustain an awesome team culture. Instead, it's actually a responsibility that should fall on all members of that team. And that's actually what made this team so special, was that I realized, you don't have to be a manager to be a leader. And the skill sets and characteristics of really great leaders can translate and should translate really to any role within an organization. And leadership should actually come from everywhere. For this group of people, it just required all of us to step up and be those leaders that our team needed. So, what characteristics worked? How did we do this? In this talk, I'm going to walk through 7 ways that you can build an awesome engineering culture starting tomorrow. All right, so number 1 is to identify and remove blockers that prevent your team from being productive. Now, chronologically, of course, this starts with that onboarding experience. Ineffective onboarding can cause a lot of unnecessary blockers. So we have to make sure that we're leading our teams in establishing a great onboarding program if you don't already have one set up. Because employee onboarding is going to make up a new employee's first impression of your company. And so it's that ideal place to set standards. Obviously, most people just want to start coding right away. And so in order to address some of these blockers before they even come up, let's make sure that we have a really solid and well-documented onboarding process. Here, we're maybe discussing the team's ways of working. So a lot of us are, of course, remote right now. We're saying, here's the hours that we're expected to be online, how we indicate if we're offline or available, when we're expected to be on calls? Do we have our video on? Is that a type of our culture? What does that look like? Then we're, of course, providing an overview of that team, that project, and where it sits within the organization. So I work for a large company, and so I think this is really, really essential just to show, the person maybe in a whiteboarding session or online using visuals or diagrams, like here are the teams that we interface with. Here's where our application fits, our downstream, our upstream consumers, all of that info. Then we're matching the new hire with a peer buddy and a peer mentor. So I like to look at these two roles as two different people. So the peer buddy is that person who is kind of facilitating that onboarding process for the individual the first couple weeks. They can go to for any question, they can hop on a call, just make sure that that process goes really well. And then the technical mentor is going to be that person who helps them with perhaps their first code review, maybe the first, complex feature that they pick up, that person who's maybe a little bit more seasoned on the team who can help them with their first, again, feature that they pick up. Then similar to whiteboarding, like all the different teams who we interact with, I'm also going to help them build a social network, actually providing them a list of people that they could meet with within the first couple months of their project to start, just realizing who they're going to work with on a day-to-day basis. So whether it's service teams who they're going to frequently interact with, or maybe it's a UI team who consumes our data, just making sure that they understand who's who can be really, really powerful to set up right away. And then let's ask that person what they prefer for a welcome celebration. We have to assume that not everyone wants, that happy hour. Maybe they want to log off, right away after work. They have family stuff to get to. So asking them what they prefer for a welcome celebration, whether it's, again, happy hour, lunch, virtual lunch, donuts. Maybe it's just an introduction in Slack and their team channel, whatever they prefer. As I mentioned, people just want to start coding right away. And so this means trying to speed up the amount of time it takes to onboard that new team member, and also limiting the amount of time they spend searching for answers to technical problems. So let's make sure we get all of those access requests completed as soon as possible. We're helping them set up their development environment. Ideally, we have step-by-step processes with links and screenshots that they can actually even contribute to if anything is confusing. We have visuals of our application, network, architecture, tech stack, diagram and visuals so that they can consume that and easily know what is what and who is who. Releasing to production can also be a really intimidating process. So I like to make sure that that is well documented, all the technical steps, as well as who and how to communicate changes. Then we have our miscellaneous developer tools. We have our, CI/CD pipelines. What testing frameworks do we use? What testing tools do we use? What chat apps tools? What is our source controls? Our, preferred branching and forking, et cetera, techniques. Get them all that they need to get set up and productive right away. I also like to make sure we're finding quick wins that new hire can complete their first week, such as bug fixes or small enhancements. These just really help that person to build confidence, get familiar with the code base, and just understand that full developer workflow right away. And at this time, I just like to review and contrast what does a day in the life of a really productive engineering team look like versus an unproductive day in the life. And I want to make sure that I'm acknowledging that this day in the life is like ideal perfection, right? So of course, none of us are experiencing this on a day-to-day basis, but I just want to contrast these to give you a couple ideas maybe as to new processes or tools that you could introduce to get closer to this ideal life. Okay, so in an ideal world, I'm logging on, I'm checking my project management tool to see, an update for what I last worked on, maybe where some of my other team members are at too, if I have dependent services. Then I'm attending my team stand-up and I'm sharing an update, including any blockers that I'm facing on my current work. Then I'm checking to confirm that my local environment has been automatically updated with libraries matching other environments. Then I'm going to pull down the latest code and make incremental changes that are quickly validated by deploying to my local environment and running various unit tests. While working, I'm accessing various technical documentation that's easy to find, perhaps getting help from another team member by posting a question in our team's chat apps tool. Then I'm focusing on a task for a few hours without interruption, committing code change, which is going to run through various automated checks before being deployed to production. My code change is going to include a thorough description of what that change achieves. And I'm also linking it to maybe a Jira story, just where our product owners or other business partners can also get an update of what's happening. Then I'm going to release my change to production, maybe that same day, while monitoring health metrics and a one-stop shop dashboard tool. So I'm super, super confident that what I've changed doesn't have any upstream or downstream negative impacts. Now, as I mentioned, we're going to contrast this. And of course, I'm sure this unproductive day might resonate a little bit more, but again, it's just about making progress. Okay, so an unproductive day. Perhaps I'm waking up to several escalation alerts for unresolved issues in production because that assigned on-call team member didn't wake up to calls overnight. I'm checking various dashboards and digging into application logs to try to attempt to troubleshoot the issue or just understand what's going on. Finally, I'm identifying the issue. I'm reaching out to users to apologize for this issue while responding to several direct messages from leadership asking for updates on that fix. Meanwhile, I'm searching for documentation for another team's API that's going to be required to fix this issue. Okay, finally, I'm writing the fix. I'm waiting for an infrastructure team to approve an emergency change request to deploy to this access controlled server. Meanwhile, I've missed stand-up while troubleshooting, but I'm joining several other status meetings throughout the day where I'm sharing a recap of the issue and my progress. Now, of course, this unproductive, organization, this unproductive day, everything just takes longer than it should. There's so many different blockers and small inefficiencies that don't seem like a big deal at the time, but this process friction is just really adding up, of course, leading to an unhappy developer. Okay, so we have to make sure that we're constantly working to, again, improve processes that enable our team to be as productive as possible. So asking questions like, what processes are broken? What is harder than it should be? And what do people on the team complain about? We can be ones to step up and take on these challenges. And of course, bringing others along as you come up with and implement solutions. So if you notice other people are stuck, waiting for that newly built feature to be tested, put together a better or more automated QA process. Or if you find it common to need multiple, revisions to complete a feature, maybe we have to improve the way that our spec and design our feature requirements are documented. Just some other reflection questions to get you thinking about this and what could be going on in your organization and how you could improve that experience for your team now. Okay, so at this point, I want to talk about that rubber duck theory. So from the book Programmatic Programmer. That rubber duck theory, is when you're hitting your head against the wall, you're trying to figure out what's going on. Maybe you have a team member, a fellow colleague who is going through this and talking to this, metaphorical, this hypothetical animal. You're explaining to the duck what your code is supposed to do at a high level, line by line. You're explaining it in detail. Ideally, at some point, you're going to tell that duck, what you're doing and realize that problem. I like to say, let's offer to be that rubber duck. So you can help, instead of your colleague talking to this, imaginary animal, you can actually be that rubber duck for them. And even better, instead of being silent, asking questions that enable that person to reach a new perspective on that problem and also reach that solution on their own. And so that wraps up number one, is just to make sure that we're working to identify and remove blockers that prevent our team from being productive. All right, number two is to empower others. And this one is especially important for those senior lead or more seasoned engineers on the team to make sure that the entire team is empowered to make decisions and to really take part in delivering our products. And when I think back to that team that I mentioned, without a manager, it actually enabled each of us to feel a lot more connected to our priorities and to our customers. because we were just forced to share this responsibility of making decisions related to those product and processes. And I like to say, bad leaders are those ones that are just telling people what to do. Better leaders or good leaders are explaining the why, really connecting with that vision of why we're doing what we're doing. And then, of course, great leaders are involving people in making decisions. And so if we're in leadership roles, we have to ensure that decisions are made at the level where the best information is available. There's this study from 1989 called The Iceberg of Ignorance that shows that a lot of the actual day-to-day costly problems are not known to top-level leaders. And as you can imagine, this can be a really expensive issue if our frontline teams, so the teams that we're working on, our software engineering teams, don't have opportunities to voice these problems that they're experiencing and contribute to the solutions. And so how can we melt this iceberg? I think it starts with being humble. Whether it's doing paired programming on complex features. So that team I mentioned, it was so cool because a lot of the more seasoned, lead level engineers would not just pick up these cool features and say, hey, this is something really cool to work on and we can really learn something new, but they would offer to help other people. They would say, hey, why don't you pick this up and I can pair program with you so that you can learn more about this. Also doing collaborative code reviews, making sure that folks are getting an opportunity to, review more complex features and also learn from others as they are adding, feedback and ideas to other people's code reviews. Then making sure that we're seeking to understand and expose costly pain points, really advocating and amplifying your team's voice if they are going through tough processes. Advocating for anonymous pulse surveys if possible. That can be one of the best ways to get at and understand some of these painful processes. And then doing stay interviews. So a lot of folks are familiar with the concept of an exit interview where, maybe an engineer sits down with HR after they've already chosen to leave an organization and talks about, what went wrong or what could have been better about this experience at this company. I think instead we should do stay interviews. So, figuring out, if you were to leave tomorrow, what would you be leaving for? What would that reason be? And how can we improve those experiences for folks while they're still at our organizations instead of waiting for them to decide to leave? But, while we're building technology that the entire team is going to have to support, we have to figure out, who should participate in making decisions, who's going to have to carry it out, and who's going to be impacted by the results of those decisions. And again, as we're all supporting products as a team, can everyone understand the reasoning for that decision? And are they well documented? And speaking of documentation, knowledge needs to be spread across the team. So we don't have gatekeepers. We make sure that, architectural decisions are really well documented. And even if everyone wasn't involved in making that decision, people understand why it was made. As I mentioned before, it's really important for those, senior level engineers to take note, but we have to make sure that we're waiting for conversations to play out before offering up your opinion, because we want the collective team to come up with solutions. And so making sure that people know that they can disagree with you if you have been on the team for a long time, not holding your ideas sacred, and also just trying to break away from any emotional attachment to previous decisions that you've made. So on this team that I mentioned, I never witnessed like competition, resentment, or distrust. Everyone just truly respected one another and their unique perspectives. We were all aligned and just working towards the same goals, and we were in it together. Lead engineers, like I said, partnered with junior level developers to make sure that they understood the entire tech stack and could independently support our customers. And I personally felt like my opinions and ideas mattered. And so that's why my second tip is just to make sure that we're empowering every single person on that team. And number 3, a phrase that I heard from one of my favorite mentors was to share credit, take blame. People can get really lost when they're working on these big initiatives. And so here's where I think it's really important that we showcase others and the team as a whole more than you showcase yourself. As for the take blame piece as a leader, we work in technology, things go wrong. And we have to react to production issues and take accountability for the things that do go wrong. So it's not about pointing fingers or bringing up names of people on your team. We are accountable as leaders. And so we have to be the type of leader who takes accountability and leads the team in recovering, and most importantly, putting in tools and processes in place to help avoid future hiccups. Is the right monitoring in place? Are there more alerts that we could set up? On that team that I spoke about, as a primary on-call team member, you knew that you were never alone. And there were actually countless occurrences where engineers picked up shifts when they knew someone had to focus on life events or just needed a break. And that was one of those qualities that made this team so special, was that we had each other's back. Number 4 is to never devalue people in the process of delivering a solution. Of course, delivering innovative, high quality software at a steady pace is going to just require motivated, involved, and happy people. But how do we care about and enable people as humans? I've learned that when it comes to humans, abstraction is bad. We're not in assembly lines. And even those who are in assembly lines, what someone can produce and what someone is worth at work is a lot more complex than we can safely put numbers around. Because value is just described in so many different ways. One thing I see new leaders struggle with commonly is incentivizing the right things. It's important to note that people notice what we talk about and focus on in career statuses and other meetings. So it makes sense to think about, what are people incentivized by? What do you celebrate and recognize publicly? They're going to adjust their behaviors to focus on these things. And teams that aren't using success metrics typically grow and learn based off of purely unreliable experiences. Or sometimes people aren't collecting any metrics at all. We have to make sure that we're collecting metrics and make sure that we are also measuring a wide variety of metrics that can be helpful to help our teams grow. So if you think about, what are your expectations of your team members and what are they incentivized by? What do you celebrate publicly? What do you talk about when it comes to value of your team? Let's talk about establishing and tracking some valuable team metrics. Now, it's important to measure things for a lot of different reasons. It helps teams estimate and plan, will help us also calculate cost, which can lead to better decision-making. It also helps improve process and product outcomes, help communicate individual and team expectations. They can be really motivating and inspiring if we have metrics that people really care about, and also just helps us identify where change is needed. Now, one caution is to not focus on tracking only individual metrics. It should be about the team. Because individual engineers don't own or maintain code, teams do. And so we have to incentivize people to think about work and spending their time cooperatively and optimizing what is best for that team. Which of course is harder for managers because, it's easy to count the number of hours someone spends at their desk or online or how many lines of code they commit than to really seek to understand the performance and the quality of the code that the team delivers. Okay, so what does a good metric look like? A good metric is designed to answer real questions, is curated frequently, is auditable, is consistent, is visible, and it's diverse. So we have a large variety of metrics that we're tracking. Let's look at some examples. First, there's lead time. So this is the amount of time from commitment to customer to getting something working in production. This can help us, again, just improve responsiveness to our customers using tools like timestamps, or GitHub has a lot of hooks and APIs that are great. Another one is cycle time, so that amount of time to make a change in a production system. This can help improve or just be aware of the speed of our technical processes. We can use CI/CD pipelines to easily measure cycle time. Example question that cycle time helps to answer is, once code is ready and tested, how fast can it be available in production? Then velocity, which a lot of folks will probably be more familiar with. So that amount of work a team can tackle in an amount of time. This helps us improve estimation and planning. We can use story points to measure this and can help answer a question like, can this team commit to delivering a new feature by a proposed deadline? Now we want to remember that story points and velocity are non-objective estimates, so it is not fair to compare across various teams. We only want to use this within one team for estimation and planning. Another one is mean time between failures. So this will help us define an application's performance in its current production environment, of course, to help us improve performance. We can use tools like monitoring and alerting platforms like Elk and Grafana. And a note here is to look at general trends instead of specific numbers. Okay, so how about some other things that are, let's say, more difficult to manage and track? We can look at team morale. So on a recurring basis, you could just poll the members of your team these 3 questions and have them answer on a scale of 1 to 5, either anonymously or not anonymously. And then you can also collect the responses and calculate team morale. And you can use these numbers to have really good conversations about what's going well and what's not going so well. Other metrics we can look at, like code test coverage, and then a lot of different health stats. And then there's other metrics that I actually really like to try to focus on instead of all those other ones, like how are team members mentoring each other? How effective are we at translating business needs? How aligned are we to our product's vision? How strong are our relationships with other partners? And does everyone on the team have an equal voice? Now, it can be really tempting to start measuring everything. We're spending hours running reports and reviewing them with the team. Try to just pick 3 metrics and go with them and then iterate after that. Also, let's make sure we're trying not to set arbitrary metrics. As I mentioned before, people are going to behave as to reach whatever target you set, perhaps in a way that's like counterproductive to the actual goal that's behind, our target metrics. I'll just remind you of this quote just to kind of reiterate, like, let's make sure that we're incentivizing the right things. Okay, so switching gears here a little bit, but still on the kind of the human side of software development. This team that I spoke about was made up of a lot of different individuals from diverse backgrounds and demographics. And I want to talk about, there's so many different studies about diversity and how impactful and beneficial it is to organizations. There's so many different unique ways that people think and learn, relate to others, and approach their work. And we have to work to celebrate and reap the benefits of these unique characteristics of every individual. If you're a numbers person, just some stats on how diverse teams are outperforming non-diverse teams. And when we talk about diversity and inclusion, these are 2 very different things. So diversity refers to who's at work. So who are you recruiting? Who are you bringing onto your teams? And then inclusion refers to how people feel once they do get to work, once they are on that team. And as leaders, we do have to work to make sure that everyone on our team is able to be their authentic selves every day at work without question. I found that people are going to bring their whole human self to work every day, even if they try not to. And it can be really draining for people to spend their energy trying to hide an essential element of who they are. Instead, we want them to spend their energy building awesome technology. Now, I want to talk about how this lack of diversity on our engineering teams has also failed us in the products that we're delivering. So from facial recognition software to crash tests, this lack of diversity can even become deadly to some of our users. And I have a hypothesis for why this can occur. I think, building products to solve a new problem is all about creativity. And I love this definition of creativity. It's making unexpected connections between things that we already know. And so if our teams are made up of the exact same type of person, with similar experiences and backgrounds, if they all had the same experiences, we wouldn't be able to come up with creative solutions by definition. And so that range of possible solutions to an engineering problem is just going to be significantly smaller on a non-diverse team. And so that's why it's important for many reasons to have a diverse and inclusive engineering team. So when we're recruiting, let's make sure we're trying to show up to recruit at different places, not that same 4-year university every single year. And also making sure that our interviewing and hiring processes are acknowledging and removing as much bias as possible. Okay, so now number 5 is to be vulnerable. which to me is the ability to own your own mistakes and not try to cover them up. Other members of your team are going to really follow suit if you create this type of culture as a leader. And in fact, this is one of the core components that I look for when I'm interviewing potential candidates. This also requires that you articulate your own stories of struggle, talk about the times that you failed, be relatable so that they feel comfortable to do the same. This is really going to be the type of culture that is going to allow teams to thrive. So not feeling like we have to be poised and not showing personal emotions. The best leaders that I've worked with have admitted their own mistakes and brought those learnings to the team. And one way to do this is just to ask for feedback. And instead of saying, straight up, do you have any feedback for me? You can ask, if you were in my position, what would you do differently? Or tell me something I do that bothers you. Number 6 is to establish trust. And I think this is one of the most important skills in really leading without authority too. Trust is good for a lot of different reasons. It's going to help increase commitment to team goals. Our communication is going to improve in general, letting ideas flow more freely and be more creative. People are going to become more comfortable with change and willing to work through ambiguity if they trust you as a leader and if they trust other people on their team. Now, to build trust as leaders, we have to do both effective and cognitive trust. Effective trust is like that trust from the heart, that sense of rapport, empathy, closeness with a person based on feelings generated by multiple interactions with them. Whereas cognitive trust is like trust from the head. So their confidence in your competence, skills, and reliability based on stuff that they've seen. And so a couple examples of effective trust, trusting others first, supporting people even when they're making mistakes, creating open lines of communication, and absolutely connecting with people off task by seeking to understand their backgrounds, interests, and aspirations. I spend at least, 5 to 10 minutes in every single one-on-one understanding, what did you do this weekend? Or how is your family? Or how is that trip planning coming? Making sure that we're connecting with people off task. And then some cognitive trust examples are to assume positive intent and do what you say you will do. And then lastly, being transparent, again, soliciting feedback and then acting on that feedback when you receive it. Also, just some great old-fashioned team building activities can really help to build trust on your team. One thing that we've introduced as a team is to do a photo of your weekend. On every Monday in Slack, we'll post and say, hey, let's see a photo of your weekend. It's a cool optional thread for folks to share, something fun they did that weekend and others to learn more about them. Similarly, we do a weekly reply all question, just an optional thread for folks to learn more about each other outside of work. Then there's a lot of other ways to connect, like board games online. We had a team Spotify playlist once, or just other, again, off-task channels where people can talk about their hobbies and interests. All right, so I truly believe that the best cultures are the ones where every team member takes accountability to lead and puts the team first. And these are the teams that are just going to have more engagement, higher retention rates, productivity, and best of all, just be the most enjoyable to work on. So thank you so much. Stay safe and take care, and I'll be here to answer any questions you have.